touching on the initial point you made, I I mean, and you can speak to this a lot better than I can, but just from what we're hearing about this staff and how they're recruiting and how they're building relationships in Louisiana and Texas is tremendous. I mean, when I talked to Davis Robinson and how impressed he was with Kerry Cooks, and then also the coaches at Waxahachie, how impressed they were with Kerry Cooks, and then for Davis Robinson to say that other coaches that he had offers from were talking highly about Robert Steeples was kind of incredible. Like that's
Yeah, you
and
don't
so I
hear that
feel like
often.
yeah, you don't hear that often at all. So that's I mean Cortez Hankin, I mean you go to the list, these guys are building these relationships. Obviously Frank Wilson we know has these relationships and not to say these guys don't already have some, but still what they've done so far and including Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly has been at a lot of schools, has been in a lot of houses and I'll turn it over to you, but everything I feel like I've read and heard has been overwhelmingly positive. So just the overall impression of Brian Kelly has been uh, really really good for LSU.
Right, and I'll say what Archmany School Newman, but Nelson Stewart, their head coach, raved in an article this week on the site about Brian Kelly and when he finally got to sit down and talk with him. And look, I'll tell you, there's Jacoby Matthews, for instance. A couple of people now have told me after the in-home visit this week, and obviously he'll get to spend more time with Brian Kelly this weekend. But when Brian Kelly went there on the in-home, after he left, that Jacoby was raving about, hey, look, I really like Brian Kelly, and almost sort of like they had a nice kind of like rapport happen right away. And I'm not, and I'll give you this statement, and this is not some knock like that other coaches aren't this or that Orgeron wasn't this, but specifically to Brian Kelly. And he's coming from a career, 30 plus years in the Midwest and the Northeast. And there was so much, curiosity about how he would do, not just in the SEC, but in Louisiana and the Deep South. And, much culture shift for him. And we've gotten past the whole family thing and all that. And now he's actually making in-homes and he's going to these places. And two people have told me this, one of them being a parent, another one being kind of just a source in the industry who's close to this family and got a chance to see it. But they said when Brian Kelly you close the door, you're in there, there's no cameras, you're not in front of a big team meeting room talking, any of that. It's just y'all in the living room, that he's phenomenal. And they were like, he is so good in terms of getting his point across, selling the program, selling his belief between, the marriage of academics and football and development and graduating and all these different things that I think that's going to be something that at LSU maybe is an unexpected bump for them. Like I think he came here and everyone just said like, man, he's good thing he hired Frank Wilson. He'll have to do all the
Yeah.
recruiting for him. He better hire a staff who recruits for him. And it seems to me, at least the early returns are that, when you've got Kelly there, closing a kid or when he's got his office door closed and talking with his family or in their living room, that he was great. And I'm not saying he's not great in front of a podium or wherever else, but they were specifically speaking to recruiting and how a kid and a coaching staff close on a kid and sell the program. And I think people have been really impressed. And maybe it's just because we always saw Brian Kelly on TV and he was the Notre Dame coach that everybody loved to hate. And now he's here and there was all this, backlash or national rhetoric of how would it work out. And now that he's going into high schools and going into homes, I think a lot of that rhetoric, at least here in Louisiana, is changing. And these people are saying, look, this guy's got a very detailed plan of what he wants to do, what he envisions from the program, what he envisions from the student athlete, standards that need to be met. And I think when you're dealing with parents who are about to send their kids off to, away from home for the first time, that's a very big deal. And I think he's sells it probably with the best of them. And he's got a good track record of saying, hey, look, I've been at Notre Dame. It's one of the highest, learning institutions in the country when it comes to also being good at football. And I think he's trying to carry a bit of that down to LSU just in terms of what he's building and what he wants to see from the program as a whole, which I think if everything works out for them, we'll see how many games they win, but I think that they're going to retain their roster a little bit better because I think it's going to be, you weed out a lot of these guys even in recruiting and you're not doing it once they get to campus, which I think is just something that you kind of do over time and learn over time as a head coach.
Yeah, no, Brian Kelly is off to a great start, and next week when we do this podcast, he could be off to a phenomenal start.
He has won no
So
games. Let us just make sure we're saying that right. That we always have to end by saying this does not mean that they're going to win a lot of games.
0-0, 0-0 at the moment.
That's a perfect record, I guess. 500.
There you go, undefeated.
However you want